So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at how to set up some artwork files for tiling when we're cutting out a bigger sign than our CNC machine has the capability of doing. Now, of course, in Carbide Create Pro, there is a tiling feature, but I very seldom ever do tiling work. And it's pretty straightforward to do tiling without using the tiling feature within Carbide Create if we just kind of understand some of the basics on how the machine operates and so forth. So I've kind of done this little bit of a mock-up here just to walk you through it here on the computer, and then when we actually bring the design or the files into Carbide Create and how that might translate to our machine and actually cut it out and see if this thought process actually works out. All right, so this large rectangle represents the bed of my machine, and so the first thing that I'm going to actually be doing is this is the overall piece of stock. I'm going to set my stock somewhere on the machine. It really doesn't matter where, but in my case, I set the end of my stock 6 inches from the end of my bed. And again, that's not relevant because that actual distance is not relevant because we are going to set our tool point or our job start point right here in the lower left corner. So that's why I have these blocks here, is because when I slide my stock down, I'm going to slide it right to the edge of that block. So on my stock, I have a line drawn at 18 inches, okay? So once this first section cuts out, I'm going to slide it down to that 18-inch line, and then we're going to do the second part of the design, okay? And so the second part of the design is this. And so I just kind of want to illustrate this point a little bit. I am going to give this line a different color, something that we can see fairly well. And then I'm just going to take this and put this box right on top of this one, okay? And when you do that, you can see, if I delete this colored square, you can see that those two do line up. And you can also see where this ends, and you can also see this one here. I'm going to bring it to the front. So there is 2 inches of overlap is how I have it designed, to have 2 inches of overlap. So if we start the start position of the job at the same point on both halves, then the tool should start pocketing this right in place where it needs to be. Because again, these blocks are going to hold our stock left to right. So our stock cannot possibly move left to right, or it's not going to move very much, if any. And so, um, so then when it does the contour cut, then it should line up perfectly and contour that out just fine, because we're going to do a through cut, obviously, uh, and everything should work out when you're setting it up that way. So that's kind of how I've got this thing set up for the 2-inch overlap. I've just drawn a line on my stock so I know how far I have to move it down, and I'm going to line up that line when I do the second part of the cut. It's going to start by doing the pocketing, and then it's going to obviously do the contour. So that's what we're gonna. That's how we're gonna set it up. That is the process in general. So I am going to go ahead and mount the stock to my machine, get that done, and then we'll go into Carbide Create and set up these two design files so we have it set up correctly here. I'll show you how we're going to do that. All right, so now we have to export our artwork here from CorelDRAW as SVG files and bring those into Carbide Create to set up how we're going to actually go about cutting this. So first things first, let's get rid of our dimensions because we don't need those. We don't need those. We don't need these setup blocks. We'll talk about those later. And we don't need these. Okay? So the concept here is if we take this, and so we have these setup lines, those are the same on both pieces. So that is your 0 point, and this is your new 0 point. Okay, so that's where the difference is. So if I bring this over, so I'm just going to grab this piece here, and I bring it right to here, you could see that it lines up absolutely perfectly right to that point right there. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. So what that tells me is this is going to be our first SVG output right here. And now technically these lines aren't even on the stock. Okay, so just a reminder that this line right here is at 18 inches. And so over here on this blank, we're at 18 inches. So that's why we lined those two up, because that's exactly at 18 inches. So on my stock, this big yellow rectangle represents my stock. This is the whole length of my board. Okay, so the first 0 point is going to be there, and then we're going to slide this whole thing down to that point there. Okay, so we are going to move this. So this becomes, so just so we have a clear understanding. So to start with, that's going to be our 0 point. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to move this. Let's go ahead and draw a little line here, I guess. Okay, so then we're going to move this for our second run at it. We're going to move it down to here, and then we're going to move this one over, slide it down to right there. Okay, now if we delete that, you can see it does in fact line up. Okay, so this definitely is our first piece. So that takes care of that. I'll get rid of some of these guidelines here. And then this becomes our second piece. So we'll move that box up there. This becomes our 0 point for our next run, if you will. Okay? So just a reminder that let's go ahead and put another guideline back at 18 so we can just kind of hit this place home. So that is going to be slid down. This is the original point, then it's going to be slid down, and then that becomes my new point. So if I take this artwork and plop it right on there, and I delete that, you can see that that lines up perfectly. So those are the two pieces that we now need to successfully cut out our sign, I believe. Again, I've never really done this, so I don't know. I don't know how my results are going to be, but we'll figure it out as we go. All right, so now let's go ahead and just export these two. So I'm going to export as an SVG here, and we'll call it Ray Boom Boom 1. So there we go. It's going to export our first SVG, and then this will be an SVG2, but it's going to be 02. Okay? So there we go. So now let's go into Carbide Create. And really the size of our stock is not really that relevant. 18 by 24 is fine for now. We might want to make that, let's go ahead and make that height 30. The stock is 3/4 inch thick. That'll be fine for what we're doing. So let's go ahead and import our artwork here. And we're going to do Boom Boom 1 here. Okay. Not sure why. That's not. File. I'm not sure why. All right, let's go back over here to CorelDRAW. There's obviously some reason that's not doing what it's supposed to. All right, let's export this again. Selected only. Yes, we want to replace it. Click on preview. Okay, so it appears to be exporting nothing, and now I know why. So if you're using CorelDRAW, it's because CorelDRAW does something really weird with multi-page documents and puts things on something they call a master layer. Well, you can't export things on a master layer. So sometimes I forget that little caveat. So, and it doesn't warn you. It should, which is kind of silly that it don't, but that's what the problem was. I didn't even have to look because I ran into that problem 1,000 times. But if you're exporting something and you can't export it, it should say, hey, you can't export this, and tell you why. Not just pretend to do it and then you sit there and struggle why it's not working. All right, so re-import. Okay, so it's telling me I have open vectors, and I knew that I did, because these are open right here. So we don't really need those, so we can get rid of those. That's fine. So there you go. So this bounding box is kind of just that. It's a place for both files to wind up at the same start point. Okay. So now what we'll do is we'll come in here. We will pocket. So let's go over here to Toolpaths, and we're going to pocket our current selection here, which we are going to use an 1/8 inch because this is only 5 millimeter wide. We are going to do 3/8 of an inch deep, and that's going to be that. Although I do want to double check that. Let's go back over here to the design side and double check that. Yeah, the zero height's from the top. Perfect. Okay. So that's kind of our first step. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to. So I'm going to hit File, Save As here, and we are going to save this as Ray Boom Boom is fine, but we're going to call it Pocket 1. I guess we'll call it Pocket 1. Okay? And then we'll go back over here to Toolpaths, and the only thing that's going to be a little bit different here is we will go ahead and, well, let's just delete that pocket, and let's go with this one, and then let's go back to File, and let's see here. We are going to go back here. We are going to set the zero height to the bottom now, and let's go to Toolpaths. So we're going to select that toolpath, and we are going to do a contour cut. We will use the current selection, and this time we are going to use a different tool. We are going to use the 1/4 inch, and I'll just on the 1/4 inch I will change my depth of pass to an 1/8 of an inch. Everything else I'll leave the same, and we are going to go to the outside, And this time we are going to go 0.80. That's what I usually do for this particular material. So, and that should cut all the way through. The next thing we have to do is come back over here to the design tab, and we do want to throw in a couple of tabs. So we'll put one there and there and there and there, maybe even one on the outside here. What the heck? Okay, tabs are cheap. All right, so now this file, we'll hit File, Save As, and this file, we'll call it Ray Boom Boom but instead of Pocket 1, we'll call it Contour 1. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and hit Save. Okay, so that's all taken care of. So let's just create a new file now. And then let's go ahead and import our second one here. So this will be our second one. And we are going to go ahead and come in here and select just our interior pieces. And we're going to Toolpaths and we'll choose Pocket. And we are going to pocket 0.375, so 3/8 of an inch thick. And then we have to change out our end mill to a 1/8 inch end mill. Now I do actually change my depth per pass to an 1/8 of an inch. I've never had a problem with that, so the rest of it, feed rate we could increase a little bit too, but that's okay. I'll just leave it at that. 3/8 of an inch deep. Now the one thing we do want to do is come over here to the design tab and make sure we are using our Z height is to the top. So there we go. And we have that same rectangle that we had and that same start point. So now when we run this second job, as long as our stock has been slid down to the right point, it should pick right up where it left off. So we'll hit File, Save As. And so we will go ahead and save this as Pocket 2. And hit Save. And then we are going to go back to Toolpaths and we're going to delete this pocket. And then we are going to select that and we're going to do a contour. Yes, we'll use the current selection. Switch out our bits here. So we're going to do a contour cut right here. And our depth, we are going to change to 1/8 inch. Depth is fine. Everything else I kind of leave the same. For our max depth here, we are going to do 0.80 because we're doing a contour cut. So, and then we're going to go to the outside, of course. And there we go. Okay. So that should be it. And then we do have to, of course, add a couple of tabs. So we'll add one there and one there, and down here and over there. So that takes care of all of those. And then we will save this one as Contour 2. All right. So now we have all of our individual pieces created, and we should have no problem getting this cut and having everything work out the way we need it to work out, hopefully. As long as we put our stock in our machine right, set our 0 point correctly, and all that good stuff, we should have good success in getting this cut out properly. So with that all said and done, now we can go into Carbide Motion, get the board set up on our machine, and actually get to cutting. So we will, one last thing, I did change that, yes. So the 0 height, I didn't change that, look at that. The 0 height being from the bottom. I did not change that. So there we go. So now I was wondering if I had done that. It just kind of dawned on me. When you're doing through cuts, it's better to set your zero to the bottom versus the top. So that's why I always do that. And you can see here the thickness, I had it set at 0.75, which that is pretty close, but I have it set in toolpaths to my depth is 0.80. And that way I know it'll just barely go into the wasteboard, but I know it'll cut all the way through. So there you go. So now we can go into carbide motion and start cutting these pieces out and see if we can make this work real good for us. All right, so we have our stock set up here on our bed of our CNC, and you can see we have these little blocks that I put here flush, and then I have several lines as I was figuring this out, but I have this 18-inch line, and we're going to move that line down right to this point once we get the first portion cut. So what I'm going to do to set my zero, I am going to take my 60 degree here, and because it has a fine point, so I can boom, put it right there on that corner as my start point for my first part of my cut. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done. Get my zero set for my first cut and go ahead and start cutting. Okay, so you can see now that I have moved my XY position right to the corner of my board. Now I can go ahead and set the zero in carbide motion and go ahead and start this job. And when I start the job, it's going to tell me, it's going to raise the Z height here, and it's going to tell me I need to insert my 1/8" end mill. So I will go ahead and begin this process. So we can see now that we have our first file cut. So this is our pocket 1 file that we made. And now we're going to go ahead and do the contour cut, which is contour cut number 1. And you're going to see that contour cut go beyond that 18-inch line by 2 inches is what it should do. So it's going to ask us to switch the bit out. And when we switch the bit out, earlier I said that if we have these collars on, that we wouldn't have to change our Z height. But in this case, we are going to change the Z height because I had to adjust the collar on that one. I didn't have enough sticking out that I felt comfortable was going to hold into the router, so I had to move this collar down a little bit. This one I'm going to leave the way it is because changing the Z height is really not a big deal at all. It's not going to really affect what we're doing here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our contour cut number 1, and see how that goes. Okay, so now it's kind of the moment of truth here, folks. We've got our first contour 1 cut, and you can see, I think you can see that it did cut all the way through. There may be just a couple areas where maybe it just barely didn't cut through, but it did, for the most part, cut through. So now what we have to do is we have to slide this down to our registration point at 18 inches. And you can see that this has cut 2 inches past our 20-inch line mark, which is what we wanted. So now we are going to come back to 18 inches and put that right here. And we should be good to cut. And it should pick up the next boom right there, right after this one. So we're going to go ahead and double check everything, but we are going to slide this down now. One thing I did want to point out, as you can see, I don't use clamps when I'm cutting out parts for my CNC, but I do use tiny little staples. I've got my narrow crown stapler here, And I just used 1-inch staples. I think I put one here, one up here, and maybe one over there, just to, it won't move side to side because we have these blocks, but I did not want it to move front and backwards either. So I'm gonna have to pop this off, pop those staples out real quick, and then we can move it down and re-staple it in the new position. Okay, we're getting there. Look at boom, right? There's boom. And then look at boom room. What do you see there? Well, what we're looking for here is that this is in perfect alignment. And that the spacing between boom and boom right here is roughly what it should be. And so if you look here where this B is right in the center of that arch, so what that tells me is that our tiling is all should be spot on. Now, where the real trick is, are those gonna line up? That'll be fun. Will those line up perfectly? And if they do, Bob's your uncle, we got her whipped. But we'll have to see how that works out. So now I'm going to bring this back to the current XY, switch out for my 1/4 inch bit, and then I have to Z off the wasteboard and cut contour 2 and see how we do. Okay, so I think for our first attempt, this was a rousing success. Now, were we off just a touch? You see that? We're off, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch or something like that. So there is a bit of a jog right there. And you can see here, it was supposed to end right in line, and we're like maybe 1/8 of an inch in right there too. So all in all, that's not too serious of a thing. That will stand out. So no issues. So now we have our nice long sign to put in our LEDs. So I think that's going to be a wrap on this one, and I hope it helps you kind of think about how to do that tiling with just some real basic vector prep, and I think you'll be good to go, even if you don't have the Carbide Create Pro that has that tiling feature built in. And in some respects, even if you had it, you might just want to do it this way anyhow. I don't know, but it worked, and I'm happy because it's due tomorrow, so I need to get it done. Thanks for watching.